Good morning, good afternoon to everyone joining us from across Europe, the Middle East, Africa, Southeast Asia, and beyond. My name is Mrinal Patil, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the Global Scenario Review of 2026. This webinar is jointly organized by MidCat Advisory, the Italian scenario analysis firm GSR Consulting, and its Indian partner CRDDP. This initiative has come together through the complementary strengths and perspectives of the collaborating organizations. The GOSPA Consulting brings a strategic and forward looking perspective on geopolitical, economic, technological developments, while MidCat contributes to its operational understanding of the evolving risk landscape and the realities faced by businesses on the ground. Through this webinar, we aim to offer a comprehensive view of the global landscape through different lenses, such as economics, finance, geopolitics, and technology. One that brings together a long-term strategic risks and immediate operational realities. So, ladies and gentlemen, today's discussion will examine the geopolitical, economic, and technological forces likely to shape the global business environment between 2026 and 2030, and what these developments may mean for the business strategy, resilience, and decision making. So, just a few announcements before we begin. For those interested, you can see today's discussions on our YouTube channel once they are uploaded. Also, please submit your questions through the Q&A box. We would like to make this session as interactive as possible, so please feel free to share your questions throughout the webinar. And we will try to take up as many of them, as many questions that we can. So, before we officially begin, let me give everyone a brief overview of today's webinar. So, we will begin with the opening remarks by Lieutenant General Sudhir Sharma, Chairman and MidCat Advisory, followed by a keynote address by Dr. Gabriel Pinoza, Founder and Chairman of GOSPA Consulting. The GOSPA Consulting team will then present the Global Scenario Outlook 2026 to 2030, moderated by Saud Mushtaq, Geopolitical Scenario Analyst at GOSPA Consulting. We will then move to the executive panel discussion from global scenarios to business action, moderated by Sushil Pradhan, Executive Director and COO of MidCat Advisory. And finally, to conclude the webinar with the closing remarks by Dr. Shabistan Ghaffar, Chairperson of CRDDP. So, with that agenda in mind, let us begin. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to invite Lieutenant General Sudhir Sharma, the Chairman of MidCat Advisory, to deliver the opening remarks. General Sharma has held distinguished command, staff, and instructional and diplomatic assignments, including service as India's defense attaché in London and leading the modernization of logistics for the 1.3 million strong Indian Army, a decorated military leader and a recognized expert on defense, homeland, and corporate security. He is also a respected advisor, international speaker, and a leadership mentor. We are honored to have you here with us, sir. General Sharma, over to you.
First of all, thank you, Murnal. Thank you for the introduction. And I'm so delighted that we are co-partnering with GOSPA and CRDDP to organize this global scenario review. And I hope this is the first of many that we'll do in the future. I'm also so delighted that when we met last time in Gurgaon, we were able to think about this and bring it to fruition here in this scenario. Delighted and welcome to our friends from Europe. Good morning to you. And my friends from India, good afternoon to you. Let me go straight into this. And I will start by saying that we are at historical crossroads. Wherever forum you attend or whichever seminar you go to, they're going to talk about the end of the unipolar world. We're moving from that to a world without order, a world between order, and the complete thing is changed. Fragmented global landscape has come up to us. Now, the beauty is that this is not a passing fancy. In my opinion, this is here for a long time to stay. And therefore, you must get used to it. But underlying this, there's something else which I must bring to your attention. I do feel that the past 3 decades have been a historical anomaly. We allowed business efficiency override geographical realities. We built lean global supply chains across geopolitical fault lines. We felt because they were easy and they were cheaper and they were faster that we were able to override the geographical realities and logistics will solve that problem. Not so. I feel that anomaly has ended. We are now seeing the revenge of geography. Geopolitics now trumps geoeconomics in a big way. And today, geopolitics is the driving force of all that is happening across the world. An entire global framework, the complete global calculus of business and boardrooms must defer geopolitics. So, my first point is that if you want to understand what's happening around the world, please become a keen student of geopolitics, understand its nuances. Only then can you be able to decipher what is going to happen in the future in your board of the future. Now, to draw a few thoughts across the world, what's happening in the world today is there are two, three things which are happening simultaneously. First is this ongoing global wars, one in Europe and one in the Middle East. Though far apart, they are strictly interconnected. Both of them are attritional warfare. Both of them are taking long to carry on, and both of them are asymmetrical. I'm surprised that two superpowers are both fighting against smaller countries, and we continue to find it difficult to go through them. And we have now got the Houthis who are coming to the fray, and they have threatened to close one more Red Sea route, and they have got the capacity to do so. So this is the new global scenario where the sea routes are changed, where global trade routes become totally changed over the period of time. And we're going to live with this reality, we're going to continue with this problem. Next I come to is the energy sector. I think energy collision is taking place where the transition to a green energy is clashing head on with the need for the traditional energy security. Countries which have got deficiency in fuel and they have to survive, Japan, China, India, many countries, they need immediate oil. And therefore, that clash is taking place. Same capitals, same grid, same minerals, all clashing for same resources. And this is carrying on. Any country which hopes to get any form of strategic autonomy needs to have its energy pipeline secured. And people like countries like India, looking at Canada, America, Venezuela, Russia, Iran, you can imagine the kind of supply lines which are being built up because of the energy collision. And this is affecting the complete business structure of lots of countries and lots of corporates. Next, I come to technology. Now, we all hope that open technology would be a great driver of global business. Not so. Technology has started becoming most disruptive. Today, we got high walls made of with technology. We've got chip protection, we got AI protection, we got all this is happening, and therefore technology has now become something which is done exclusive. Everybody wants to own it. Now, China recently made an announcement that AI should be free. Mr. Xi made the announcement, and they put in a new AI of their own also. But that's not the point. My point is that who will win the technology superiority race is not important. But what is important is who will write the rules to run the technology system. And those who run the rules and say this is the way it will run are going to run and have the power to run it. Countries searching for the strategic high ground of technology, which is difficult to find. Next, I come to stability. Now, all corporates which are searching for stability in the next quarter, next financial year, are going to be very disappointed. I think volatility is the new baseline, and you've got to move from there. It will not change. It is not a passing business cycle. It's here to stay. And therefore, we need to deal with that and always be sure that we're able to deal with that. Next, I come to risks. Now, risks in today's world have become permanent, and therefore we call them perma risks. And crises have become manifold. They become polycrisis. So polycrisis and perma risks come together. They come braided. When I mean braided, I mean they're not sequentially following each other. Risks are coming together concurrently. And that creates the big problem for us to handle in the corporate boardroom. And this is what becomes a risk factor or a friction factor. Excuse me. Now, in war, friction is considered to be something which makes the simple thing difficult. But in a boardroom, friction means that your geopolitics are directly colliding with the bottom line. So, what is the role of leadership in this kind of scenario? If we want to forecast 26 to 2030 as the global scenario review hopes to do so, I feel the leadership's main role will be to transition their companies from merely efficiency, profoundly resilient. Unless you make your organization absolutely resilient, you are not going to survive the next disruption going to take place. That is the fact of life. Because one more thing which happens is that If you want to see what the future is, look at the capital flows. Money flows initially where it is the cheapest or where it is the best efficiency. No, it now flows to where it is safest. So countries which are politically safe, which are structurally safer, the capital is flowing to that place, even if it's not efficient. So to attract capital flows, we must give priority to security. It cannot become a cost center, it's a force multiplier. So if you give security primacy in the political dimension, in the structural dimension, the capital will automatically flow, else you'll be starved of capital despite your being efficient or where it is there. Next, we come to how do we thrive on risks? One of the things is that if the systemic failure, systematic weakness, systemic risk is there, then it is our duty as corporate leaders to be able to manage that. And therefore, if you make it a competitive advantage, only then can we survive this area of profound risk that is taking place in the world. Next, I come to the future of how do we deal with this kind of things when all the countries are on similar plane. We have moved from an area where those who know of Japanese system of just in time, where we had very lean inventories. The inventory came in, you used it, and goods went out. From that, we moved to just in case. So just in case means that we must cater for some problem taking place. And now we move from just in case to just from friends, which means that we cannot no longer rely on goods to come from where it is available, but only from friends. And that too, next stage is only from friends who are close by. So then becomes nearshoring is taking place. And therefore, as a country, you look to build bridges with countries which are friendly to you so that you're able to get your minerals, get your stuff from that. And that is the future of geopolitics. And therefore, the boardroom today depends more on the foreign ministries of the countries, what is happening in geopolitics, then they can drive from there. So unless you do that, and therefore my suggestion is that geopolitical literacy must be given the same primacy that we gave to financial literacy. And if you are a C-suite leader, you must understand the nuances of geopolitics. Only then can you be able to steer your thing forward. That is all I want to say in my opening remarks. I want to keep my things waiting for the rest of the day, and I wait for Dr. Gabriel to take it on from there. Was to say once again that very opportune moment when you're having the global scenario review. We are living in a difficult times in a very fractured world order, but those who are resilient, those who are prepared for it will survive. It's not going to be the future who predicts the future right is going to survive, but those who create the operations which are adaptable, which can withstand the shocks, will survive the future. Not those who can predict the future or plan for the future. The disruption is here to stay, will keep coming. Be prepared for it. Thank you, and over to you, Dr. Gabriel.
Uh, Thank you, General Sharma, for setting the context for today's discussion and reiterating the importance of geopolitics and giving sort of a broad view of the risk landscape. And it is a fantastic start to kick off today's webinar. Thank you, sir. It is now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Gabriel Penosa, the founder and chairman of GSR Consulting. Dr. Penosa is an economist and a financial sector professional with more than 3 decades of experience, a graduate of Catholic University of Milan. He's the founding member and the president of GSR Consulting. He's also a recognized commentator on macroeconomics, geopolitics, and financial markets, and regularly contributes his analysis through leading Italian television channels. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Gabriel Penosa. Dr. Penosa, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And also, I'm delighted to be here. Welcome to everybody from all over the world. And also, thank you to Mr. Sharma. Sudhir, your speech was also insightful for me. And so that is my idea for this type of introduction is just when I was younger, and since I was younger, as I think everybody, I was wondering how, if it's possible just to predict the future, just to understand what is going to happen in the future, in forthcoming future. Everybody, like a corporate leader, I think has this type of question. If it's possible to understand the crisis, to predict the crisis, to anticipate it, to get a trigger. So slowly, I understood that to get a trigger of a crisis, let me say, is almost impossible. And it's just waste of time to try to do it. But meantime, I got the sense that, and this is true GOSPA also, that to design the picture and to understand the global picture is easier, useful, senseful, and is very helpful just to predict the future. That means no, just to be a wizard or a witch, just to understand what is going on in the world, separate noise from signals, understand through ingredients that also, so dear Mr. General Sharma mentioned, just combining technology with geopolitics and economy. And just to get a sense about all the resolution that you, like attendees of this type of events, has to take during also your job and also your career. So let me give you a few elements just to enlighten about GOSPA and the potentiality that you can get from this type of event together with the job that you are doing in India with the CRDDP and the partnership also with MEDCA. So first of all, history. History is a very big ingredient because history is a very big and relevant and wise master. Sometimes we are stubborn students, but history, exactly as Mr. Shakespeare said, is a perfect prologue of now. And to understand and to read the situation now about geopolitics, also about finance and the evolution of the technology, is very important to understand and to read history in a wisely way. Because as soon as you get the history, as more as you can understand what is going on now. Predict the future is not exactly as I said before to be a wizard. Just to stay on the top of the mountain, observing what is going on right now. And the majority of the people, also the corporate leader, they don't pay attention to. Secondly, geography. Geography is, let me say, as one of the most important things along the human history. And we, along the last, exactly as Mr. Sharma mentioned, along the last decades, we forgot about the relevance of geography. We have to remind each other, like a corporate leader, that geography is one of the key points. And now the situation, the events, also the clashes, they are reminding us, the straits, choke point, that as Mrs. Bezana remind us, they are not only choke point, they are becoming checkpoint. And she will enter again in this type maybe of explanation. And last but not least, how we can just read the news. We're in infodemia. So every single second we reach some news from every single social, every single media. How we can just, let me say, separate noise from signals, just reading between the lines. So it's very important to be also strategic. And we try to do it during this type of event in order to let you understand more how you can, it's possible to combine the pieces of the puzzle, just to design the picture that is already, let me say, defined, is already arranged. For us, relevant change has been COVID-19. It's like a turning point in history. And back in history, to the last century, is very important to understand inflation, to understand rates, to understand what is going on inside of the central bank and the political situation, fiscal dominance. So a lot of elements that can be combined inside of this type of picture, also to understand how and if technology could be useful, like you, corporate leaders, just using technology, not to be used from technology. So that's super important for us. Again, I'm honored, delighted to listen to also all the speakers. And thank you very much for this great opportunity also for GOSPA. Enjoy the event to all.
Thank you, Dr. Pinoza, for that insightful and thought-provoking address to all the participants. So, with these themes in mind, we will now examine through the Global Scenario Outlook 2026 to 2030. So, to take this session forward, I invite Saud Mushtaq, a geopolitical scenario analyst at GOSPA Consulting. I now hand over to the GOSPA team to take over. Saud, over to you.
Thank you, Brunel. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone joining the webinar. Now we will go to the scenario overview, and I will introduce the GOSPA consulting firm to you and what we do actually. So GOSPA consulting firm is a scenario analysis company, and we believe in combining three core pillars, which are microeconomics, finance, geopolitics, and technology. By combining all these three pillars, we are able to provide a strategic scenario overview to our clients, which are companies, professionals, institutional investors. And by combining these three pillars, we believe we are able to look through the fog and see a broader picture. And we interpret data, information, and news as a piece of puzzle. And by looking through this puzzle, we are able to look through the risks, and also behind those risks, we are able to find the opportunities. So this is the approach which GOSPA follows, and this is the scenario analysis which we try to provide to our clients to look and take strategic decisions in their businesses. Moving ahead, I would like to give the floor to my colleagues who will show you the strategic scenario analysis in practice and take you through the current scenario which we are seeing in the world. I would like to give the floor to Matea, who will be talking about the macroeconomics and financial outlook. Over to you, Matea.
Yes, thank you, Saud. There are actually a lot to discuss because a lot of changes are going on. And I'd like to begin with Europe because it is often overshadowed by China and the United States, but it's still very important to look at. So, even though institutional actors and headline statistics says that we are not currently in a stagflation, as analysts, we have to watch behind the main narrative. And the reality is that Europe probably is already in stagflation. As we can see in this chart showing the PMI output index, which is in the blue line, which is a proxy for economic growth, and where the orange line measures input prices and is an early indicator for inflationary pressure. So we see that historically the two indicators tended to move together, even during the global financial crisis and the European sovereign debt crisis. And the reason is that those were demand-driven crises. And so when the demand collapsed, the inflation followed. But after the pandemic, we see something very interesting, that the two indices diverge, in particular with the beginning of the Ukraine war and the resulting energy crisis. And the two indices diverge because this time it was a supply-side shock. And today we see a similar divergence. That is, the output is stagnating while the inflation is accelerating. So classical stagflationary environment. And despite the fact that today's inflation is supply-driven because of the energy shock, in June the European Central Bank decided to raise the interest rate. But in such cases, the central bank should wait for the supply-driven inflation to erode the demand, because by raising interest rate, it risks weakening demand even further and potentially pushing the economy from a stagflation into a recession. And the key point, however, is that Europe's weakness would not remain confined to Europe. In fact, as one of the world's largest destination market, it could become the weak link through which economic stress is spread to other major powers. First, through lower European import, and second, through rising protectionism trend as Chinese competition puts increasing pressure on European industry, as my colleague will explain better later. And so, finally, Europe's weakness can influence global dynamics and become a source of instability, but it can also create opportunities, for example, through the exchange rate movements. Indeed, this crisis has exposed Europe's structural weaknesses, and the euro-dollar exchange has reflected precisely those vulnerabilities. And moving on with the next slide, thank you. So we have seen that inflation is once again central in the economic outlook. And in this context, as scenario analysts, we should also look at history because it can teach a lot and offer insight for the future. And the chart you're seeing is very interesting because it takes a very long-term perspective. And it shows that in the 20th century, despite the presence of wars, pandemics, energy crisis, the average inflation of the G7 was only around 5%. And by contrast, the first 2 decades of the 21st century represented an unusually favorable period. Here, mainly thanks to hyperglobalization, we had an average inflation close to 2%. And so we can say that we gradually became used to treating inflation as a marginal variable, so something that was structurally low and largely under control. But then COVID hits, representing a major turning point and bringing inflation back in the scenario because of persistent public expenditure, growing geopolitical tension, and the globalization is reversing. And in this context, in which inflation is back, what moves can we expect from central banks? Here it is very interesting to note that there is a different approach taken by the United States and the euro area. So we have the Federal Reserve, which is not raising the interest rate, even though maybe it should, because in the US, the inflation is mainly driven by demand. While in Europe, they raise interest rate, even though maybe they shouldn't, because there the inflation is supply driven, as we have seen. And this different approach could be explained by the fiscal dominance, because in the United States, the high level of public debt remain a major problem. And in this context, allowing the inflation to run could potentially be a solution for that. And so, in all of this, we also have to ask ourselves, what role can the AI revolution play? So, in principle, AI carries enormous promises for economic growth, productivity, and so it might be a deflationary force. However, this is a long-term perspective surrounded by significant uncertainties. But looking more at the present, AI appears to be both a source of growth and a source of inflationary pressure. And this because the construction of AI infrastructure is increasing the demand for energy and materials, and so pushing up the prices of many inputs. And this brings us to a paradox that it's well represented in the chart on your right, where we see that the prices of DRAM memory needed for the AI data center are increasing, as shown by the white line. And at the same time, the cost of tokens are declining, as shown by the purple line. But if token prices decline while the cost of building and operating data center is rising, this means that the return on investments become more uncertain and may take more time. And so, General, just think about it. We have an extremely high valuation of AI companies that incorporate expectation of very large profits in the near term. And at the same time, costs for building data center are rising, while token prices are falling. So it is pretty clear that this situation doesn't seem very sustainable. And at some point, probably one of these elements will have to rebalance. And moving on with the next slide, thank you. So given the growing tension in international relations, another structural change we need to consider is the reconfiguration of the global monetary system. And so on this, there is a lot of discussion about de-dollarization and whether it is really happening. So the dollar has certainly been used less over time in some areas because of the growing unpredictability of American policy and the desire to reduce the exposure to US sanction. But this doesn't mean that the dollar is dead. Indeed, during the recent geopolitical tension, it once again demonstrated its role as a safe haven currency. And so in general, de-dollarization is happening, but it is a very slow process. And in this context, the Chinese yuan is one of the currency attempting to gain ground. As we can see in the graph, there is an increase in the value of transactions settled through China's cross-border payment system, which is called the CHIPS. And this reflects an attempt by businesses and investors, particularly from emerging economy, to diversify their payment and financial flows away from American and Western control. And this because lately China is appearing to many of this economy as a more stable and predictable economic partner. But we are not suggesting that the yuan will replace the dollar within the next 5 years. That is extremely unlikely because the Chinese currency still faces major limitations. But the direction, however, is in general towards a more multipolar monetary system. And in this context, Washington has developed a potential instrument for preserving the international role of the dollar, that is a stablecoin, so basically digital dollar. In fact, under the Genius Act, stablecoin issuer must maintain reserves using highly liquid assets, mainly very short-term government bonds. And estimates, as you can see in the chart, suggest that by 2030, stablecoin issuer could become the largest holder of US Treasury. And this could provide two strategic advantages for the United States. First, expanding the use of dollar through digital payment infrastructure. And second, creating an additional source of demand for short-term government debt, making it more sustainable, at least over the short term. And so stable coins are a variable on which we need to pay attention. And so for companies and investors, the conclusion is not that the dollar is dead or should be abandoned, but that they should prepare for a world in which several currency and payment infrastructure will coexist. I hope this was insightful, and Saud, back to you.
Thank you so much, Mattia. So, Mattia took us over through the economic and financial scenario which is happening in the world. But as I said in the beginning, in GOSPA, we believe in combining three pillars. And moving ahead, my colleague Martina will take us through the geopolitical pillar and try to give you a scenario of geopolitical situation right now. Over to you, Martina.
Yeah, thank you. So then welcome to everybody also from my side. I'm glad to be here today to also try to get you more into GOSPA's way of thinking in terms of scenario. And since my part was related to geopolitics, and we also had in the keynote speech at the beginning some, let's say, insightful insights related to the roles of geopolitics, I would just like to concentrate myself and my speech on the method, GOSPA's method, to try to include geopolitics, because I think that in everybody's mind and thoughts, there is this maybe question. So yeah, geopolitics matters and is important, but what does it really mean for businesses and investors to integrate geopolitical dynamics into their considerations? Well, let's be clear the table from maybe one thing that is important in GOSPA. So there are some things that are very covered by media outlet, for example, but that are not important for the longer terms events. Let's just assume and think about Trump's, for example, posts and tweets on Twitter or his social media truth. Well, they can move, this kind of announcement can move the markets in the short term. Just think about, for example, oil prices and how they flexibly adapt to Donald Trump, for example, announcement on this social platform. But they are not really important in the longer run, because in scenario analysis, we also have to try, as I would say, to separate fog from the real, let's say, elements that shift and can change the scenario in the longer run. So the real question we should ask ourselves to integrate geopolitics in the considerations can be, what is behind Donald Trump? Why, for example, America picked him in 2024 elections to be the next president? And let's also make an experiment in terms of, let's say, geopolitical experimentation and imagination. Even though probably Donald Trump would have not been elected as the 37th president of the United States in 2024, probably some changes, some course of actions that US politics have adopted lately could have just been in place in other ways, maybe with other tones, with other languages, but probably the pattern would be the same. So we have to investigate beyond what we see and beyond also the announcement that, for example, in some crises and wars are made. For example, just think about the Middle East crisis. So geopolitics is not just including the terms or a date of an election. It's not just including considerations the, let's say, peace deal or ceasefire deal that have been announced. Is more, is combining all the things that are beyond the things that we see and that are more let's say, able to influence the course of actions. And that are the actual elements that people should focus on to take real conscious decisions. So let's shift to how in GOSPA we try to understand geopolitics. And I would like you to offer, let's say, a framework of reasoning and thinking that can be able, just to give you an idea on how we work. Of course, it's very synthesized, but to understand, as Mr. Gabriele Pinoza said, as to understand really where we are heading to, we have to also to focus where we were and where we are. And to understand the geopolitical shift, apart from Donald Trump's tweet, we should focus on a very important thing that in GOSPA we call it, and not just in GOSPA, China shock. Because the last decades have been, let's say, dominated by the fact that China has been invited by the United States, so it was an agreed term, to be part of the global economy. And that has had as an effect, the primary effect, as Mattia was showing before, the fact that the prices were very low for decades and for maybe more than decades in the last years. You can see that by the data that have been registered in Western countries, like the blue line show you how the prices of goods went down because of China overproducing globally. But then after COVID, we probably understand, and this is probably the present situation we can depict. So it's the present actions course of action, sorry. And we entered the China Shock 2.0. We are living China Shock 2.0. What does it mean? It means that China, without any agreed term with the United States, decided to ramp up the productions it used to make and makes right now to a higher level. It means that in the supply chain, China shift to a higher added value. And we are seeing how this is creating very important and huge effects in terms of economic disruptions also for European countries, especially for the automotive sector in Europe with Volkswagen that recently announced that they will just cut 100,000 of places, jobs, in European industries. But where we are heading, and that's where we should really focus our attention. Well, of course, China Shock 3.0. And what does it mean? It means that we are entering a shift where not only China and the United States are not having any kind of agreements on how to manage their relationship globally or how to manage economics, of course, but they are entering a phase in which there is a kind of a Cold War on technology. And we are seeing this because the United States are overall trying to limit, for example, the scope of actions of Chinese AI models, and China is doing the same. So, of course, it's important to maybe look at what Donald Trump's tweet yesterday, but in the long run, we should focus more on this Cold War that is it is developing under our eyes. And it's more invisible, I know, but it's a framework that should help us guiding also through the fog, as Sari was saying. So the risk and opportunities for business and investors, well, there are a lot. Fortunately, scenario analysis bring us to the big picture, to look at the big picture, and that's really an advantage to understand also maybe things that are not very clear or written down black on white. There is an important shift that is occurring because exactly United States are trying to reduce China technological advancement and development, and that's what we call strategic capitalism. And that's a very maybe fancy expression to just say what you see in this table. So the fact that US government has started to take equity stakes in some very strategic industries like semiconductor or rare earth. And you see a list of industries that have been invested by this change. And why that's important? Because that's, of course, influence the value and the prices of these industries in the stock market and can really influence their strategic economic path. Also, in Europe, we are seeing something similar. For example, I would like to show you this example of Airbus that kind of decided to shift to a French cloud for its operation rather than AWS. That's just an attempt, probably a clumsy attempt, because in Europe, we don't have like a single government or a single state, but there are attempts that really show us that there is a pattern. And for investors, again, businessmen, that's important because we have to integrate also, as General Sharda said at the beginning, we also have to include the safety and the security of investment from a national point of view. So really, to conclude, we can say from a geopolitical scenario and analysis point of view that we are in the middle of a globalization change from China 2.0 to China 3.0. And there are, again, three things that I would like you to just give you as some insights of things that we can say from these changes already, that we can already say, even though the Middle East crisis will change and so on, there are some things that are already very clear from our point of view. The first is that in the middle of a rupture, there are some changes that takes years to just show themselves and manifest. And for example, let's take what has been the situation in the Red Sea in the last years, where the ship traffic in the Red Sea declined, even though the threat of, for example, the Houthis that attacked the ships there was not there in the last months. Actually, last night, the Houthis attacked some ships in the Red Sea, so it has been like there has been a very important change, but let's take out what happened last night. In the last months, what happened is that even though there was not actual or direct threat, the biggest ship, the one you see in the last line, so the one that carry more than 18,000 TEU, didn't want to pass in the Red Sea because just of the threat and the fact that it already happened once in 2023 that the ships were attacked. So in 2026, 2025, so the red and blue sticks didn't appear for the last part of the graph because the biggest one didn't want to pass. So changes takes time. It's not just exceptions that we're witnessing. These changes produce very important long-term effects. Then coming to the perspective and opportunities, but that will be more covered by my colleague Saya in the next part. There are some opportunities in terms of again how technology can be applied, and we are witnessing this in the Ukrainian-Russia war example, how drones can really become game changer. But we are also seeing this in the civilian use. And then very important, probably the most strategic things that we in GOSPA tend to focus a lot is infrastructures. Because if we're in the middle of a globalization change, well, it will mean that the world is not going to end, the world is not going to explode, it will just adapt to new geopolitical dynamics, and it means that maybe new infrastructure reflecting new geopolitical relationship will have to be built. And we are seeing this, for example, with MSC, that have been building a new multimodal trade in the Saudi Arabia to avert the trade in the two seas, so in the Gulf, in the Persian Gulf Sea, in the Red Sea. So again, the world is not changing; it's just adapting the world is not just ending as we might see because the things that are happening are too much, and maybe sometimes we just get confused. It is just adapting to some new geopolitical tendencies that are very clear from a scenario perspective to be seen. So back to you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Martina. Very great insights. And as you guys saw, we are trying to connect different dots and different signals we see in our day-to-day life by separating the noise and the fog. And by separating these two things, we are able to look behind the fog and find out opportunities which can arrive even in the time of changing global scenario. Now, moving ahead, I would like to give the floor to my colleague Saya, and who will be talking about the last pillar, which is technology, and try to explain to everyone how technology also plays a crucial role to look at the things in a more strategic way. Over to you, Saya. Thank you.
Hello, everybody, and thanks to my colleagues also putting a base, I would say, to the most discussed and covered topics of today, artificial intelligence. Trying to demonstrate how we analyze technology, I have selected and I have tried to select some elements into which we need to pay attention while, for example, analyzing AI or technology itself and trying to somehow foresee the future as a foresight. So what I would like to start with is the recent, I would say, panic in the markets in general about the AI returns and the capex that is growing over and over. What we are witnessing today is that the debt, AI-related debt, is increasing, and most analysts are predicting that it's becoming close to 15% to the U.S. Investment issued, investment grade issuance this year. And these issuance are expected to rise up to trillions. So where these hyperscalers are spending money to, mainly to the capex, to the training and the inference costs in general. This is where the bond market actually becomes to matter, because as you can see from the graph, there is a spread in the hyperscaler issuance bonds over the governmental bonds that have increased to 148 points, meaning that creditors are the ones becoming more cautious today and the ones who are starting to ask more questions on whether or not the investment is going to return. If the hyperscalers will be able to eventually monetize the entire AI stack. So basically the question arises to the point of the AI bubble. So today a lot of analysts are assessing the risks and trying to predict what is come to next. but mostly people are forgetting the end user experience in general in the whole AI and technological, for example, development. So it moves us to the next point on, if you can shift to the next slide. Yes, it moves us to the next point. If hyperscalers and model providers are the ones pouring lots of money to the capex, where this money are going to? The question I have asked, and to define that, we have to just understand the AI layers in general. So we know that AI consists of energy and source that are used for the production of the chips, the memory, hardware that are all integrated into the infrastructure on which we train models and develop, for example, applications. So when you are investing into AI, the most important thing is to try to distinguish the stack on where you are investing. And another example would be the semiconductors. This is when semiconductors matter because those are the companies that provide hardware, demand of which is increasing due to the demand of the AI development in general. So if we look at the graph, for example, we can see the semiconductor companies 15 months raising shares and the valuations due to them being secured on their supplies. For example, Micron has secured its supplies throughout 2026, and other semiconductors are close to the hyperscalers and have secured long-term contracts. So if we think about the returns of AI and which part and which layer is secure, is the hardware also, as in the beginning Mr. Sharma has mentioned, we need to think about the energy and the lower layer that even if the crisis happens, more likely to stay resilient to this type of shocks. Another most very important element, and sorry, next slide. Another very important element in the AI overall race, I would say, is the Chinese AI narrative. That is putting investors and people under question on who is going to win this race. Is it actual technological race or not? However, to say to be scared of the Chinese would be very simplistic because there are the nuances that are worth paying attention to. The markets have recently, for example, noticed new releases of Chinese model. And when Chinese model releases, investors become scared on treating these types of models as the destroy of the economies of the United States AI. However, this might not be true because Chinese models, as we can see from the first graph, the Chinese models are taking over the markets on the AI usages. So more and more companies are using Chinese models, but it doesn't significantly mean that they are replacing the frontier United States models. Why? Because most Chinese models are very efficient and they are 60 to 90% cheaper than those of the United States. And for companies, it's more efficient and economic, for example, choice to use Chinese models for simpler tasks, but not the reasoning and the hard, deep reasoning tasks that usually US models take over. So this information, I guess, would be useful for the organizations, the end users who would like to optimize their processes using AI, on which model to choose or how to efficiently choose to then not end up by looking to the very high bills in the end. And another thing that Chinese models, I would say, offer is the open weight and the open models that we have noticed and seen, that which is the safety that they are providing to the market. So the strategy of the Chinese models is also giving security to the nations or to the organizations, allowing them, for example, to download the weights and then running them into their own servers, into their own infrastructure, which is becoming very critical for the governments, for the countries to secure. We have seen the trend, not only trend, but also strategic action on building the data centers and the infrastructure. Since every processes today, including governments, military, are integrated in the data centers and the servers, technological sovereignty is becoming more and more attractive for the governments, especially during this geopolitical crisis and everything. And this is another point on that if there is an opportunity, it's going to get weak point. Since data centers are becoming very critical, governments willing to secure them, they are becoming more precious, but it means they are becoming the attraction to destroy to the opposite side, for example. And the recent Iran targeting with drones the Amazon data centers in the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain is the actual evidence to this one. Even though the many analysts just say this action was supposed to aim the heart of US Gulf operation, it would be secure to say that technological infrastructure is changing the logic of the modern warfares. So since we know that AI is dominant in today's warfare, there are drones that are controlled, for example, with the AI, and all of these things are run in the servers and these data centers, not only, but also the banking systems. So targeting these types of sites is the actual interest. However, this is again opening another window of opportunity on the markets rising, the securing these sites, for example. What I'm talking about, if you would like to secure site, you don't talk about only cybersecurity, but also physical defense and airspace defense, for example. Here comes the counter unmanned systems that are rising in, for example, demand and in the market. So many countries nowadays are coming up with the technologies that are to secure these strategic infrastructural sites. So it's another, for example, military technology that is coming to rise next decades. So what I would like to say is when we talk about technology, there are crucial elements that you need to pay attention to, not to just follow the hype, not to be scared of the market reactions, but understand your actual needs and understand where the technology is beneficial or where it is going, for example, in many other sectors. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Saya. And with that, we conclude our presentation. And this was the overview of GOSPA scenario approach. And by using this approach and by combining the MidCat's risk analysis approach, we are able to look not only on operational risks, but also on strategic long-term decisions, which companies and our clients can take in the long run by looking, as I mentioned many times, looking through the fog. So now I would like to give the floor to Mrunal to take over, and thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Saud, and thank you all. Thank you to the GOSPA team for having a fantastic presentations with respect to economics, geopolitics, and technology, and how all of them are interconnected. This thing that I see a couple of questions in chat box also and Q&A box as well. So I request the GOSPA teams to respond on the chat box as well. And to all the participants, please put in your questions in the Q&A box and speakers would respond to you as soon as possible. So with that, we now move from global scenarios to their practical implications for businesses with respect to operational realities that businesses live in. So we begin the executive panel discussion, which is the topic for it is the from global scenarios to business action. The panel will examine how organizations can translate global developments into practical decisions, manage the emerging risks, and identify strategic opportunities. The discussion will be moderated by Sushil Pradhan, the Executive Director and the COO of MidCat Advisory. To briefly introduce, Sushil brings over 36 years of leadership experience across the military and the corporate risk management domains, including assignments in India and several complex international geographies. A decorated former Indian Army officer, he's a recognized expert in security, crisis management, and strategic risk. and a sought-after speaker and moderator at leading international industry forums. Sushil, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mrinal, and appreciate the time that all of you have taken to be here. So I have with me a very erudite and an expert panel, and I would like to introduce my panelists to you before we get ahead with the panel discussions. So I have firstly Loyolo Sivangaza. He's the Senior Enterprise Risk Manager at Woolworths, South Africa. His background includes enterprise risk management, internal audit and compliance, primarily within the retail sector. He holds an executive MBA and a master's degree in internal auditing. He has contributed to the Institute of Risk Management South Africa Risk Report and has received the GRC Excellence Award. Thank you, Loyolo, for joining us. And this is, I think, the second panel that you are being a part of in one of our webinars, and hope to see you as frequently again. Then we also have Rupinder, who's the Chief Security of AXA Global Business Services. Rupinder is based in London. He's the Chief Security Officer at AXA Global Business Services. His work covers security, governance, control, assurance, and assessment of security across information security, physical security, and operational resilience. During his tenure with AXA, he's held global leadership roles, including Global Head of Assurance and Global Head of Information Security Assurance. Thanks, Supinder, for joining us, and welcome to the panel. We have one panelist who could not join us, Karen Amaya. She's the Global Travel Risk Manager with British Council. Unfortunately, due to some unprecedented travel plans which were work-related, she is unable to join us. She's based in Bogota in Colombia. And we have Hussein Nasiruddin, who's the founder and chief executive officer of CrownOx. Thank you, Hussein, for joining us. He's currently in Jordan. He's the founder and chief executive officer of CrownOx. He's got more than 19 years of experience in security, intelligence, and political risks across the Middle East. Previously, he co-founded and led Red Crow Intelligence, which operated across Jordan, the UAE, and Palestine. He also serves on the board of directors of Birzeit Pharmaceutical Company. So thank you all for joining us, and we've had a very interesting exposition by the GOSPA team after Janil Sharma and Dr. Pinoza, where we heard about economic and financial scenarios, we heard about the geopolitics and strategic capitalism, and we heard about technology, sovereignty, and vulnerability. So now what we are going to do is focus more on the operational and security and safety and crisis management related aspects of some of these global changes which are taking place and are affecting companies. So to answer those questions, we have two practitioners in companies. So Loyolo and Rupinder will represent that part of the expertise, and we have Hussein, who assists multiple kinds of corporations across the world in securing their businesses. So the first question, Hussein, to you is, because you interact with so many clients globally, the world is increasingly described as multipolar, fragmented, or even polycrisis driven. But which single geopolitical or structural shift do you believe will have the greatest impact on global businesses from now and in the next 4 or 5 years? And why do you feel so?
Thank you very much for hosting me for the second time this year. It's a pleasure being among you always. And I would like to congratulate you first for the very important topics you always highlight. Frankly, this specific one, during the last year, it shifted from being a board of directors related topic that we discuss once every 3 months into a daily operational necessity. Everyone in the company now constantly discuss the effect of geopolitics on our day-to-day operations. It's an unfortunate reality that I believe everyone should be aware of. For those who don't really know what we do, so as you explained, we at CrownOx are very much into the Middle East and North Africa. We are mostly dealing with evacuations for the last 3 years. Everyone can imagine why the shift happened. Just to understand the level and activities we've been affected by it, we've done almost over 5,000 evacuations within 1 month last year. So those are across different countries, more than 10 countries. The beauty of the globalization today is that you can see things happening on a smaller scale before they reflect on a global level. And I believe we've learned a lot during this recent crisis, especially for the global and international effect it has. And my opinion is that the biggest shift is not multipolarity itself, but it's actually one of the side effects that we will be seeing growing with acceleration, specifically fragmentation of the international operational environment. For 100 years, every government has pushed aggressively towards a global reality where everyone should actually be able to contribute economically and financially and technologically on a global level, and know-how and the opportunities are easily distributed through a very fast channel. Today, the governmental mood is shifting dramatically into a more conservative approach because of geopolitical disruptions. The main challenge companies are seeing today is actually that they are no longer managing one global market, but several competing ecosystems. The first people to see it, in my opinion, or maybe because I'm in that bubble, is the security companies. While trying to help your client actually move from one place to another or simply solve a problem in a different jurisdiction or region, the number of barriers during the last 3 years that are rising dramatically are incredible. And we're not even noticing them because of the fast pace of changes. Today, governments are actually shaping business environments for the first time with what we all are facing: sanctions, investment screenings, aggressive investment screenings, tech restrictions, data localizations. And if we are not smart enough to understand that this is a must to be considered, I believe we will be seeing many global big players fail in the near future. Because time is short, I want to concentrate a bit on the security companies within that environment. For years, even something as simple as branding. For years, we've been all proud of where we come from originally. We all relate to specific governments or countries or cultures. And it was always a value proposition when you come from a specific background. Today, even your branding can become a very problematic reality when geopolitics shift overnight. We saw that very much in the Middle East and North Africa, especially when you go from one side to another on every border. What companies came to understand is that you can't afford to be opinionated anymore because you'll be very much affected by every line about you on social media. You can't afford to be liberal with your thoughts or your ideas, and you have to be as global as possible to be prepared for a shifting reality that no one really understands where it will stop or how much restriction it will be affecting us. Businesses operate perfect from an operational point of view, and overnight, geopolitics might disrupt strategically multi-billion operations. We saw that during the last 3 months in the Middle East, and we still are seeing that. Decisions are not being able to be made. Risk management shifting from crisis response to actually continuous resilience is a new reality. Today, when we speak with clients, they don't speak about how can we respond to a crisis, but they want actually to know how can we survive 5 different realities that are possible. At last, disruption will become, for the first time, I believe, in many years, it will become as an outcome of governmental decisions rather than a secondary effect of geopolitical realities. I don't know if we have a lot of time or we're limited, but I think this topic actually needs a couple of hours to be discussed for one simple reality. Today, we are still in the transition period on a very global level, and we are seeing a lot of effect on resources and that we're used to have for granted that no one actually know. We only are trying to have multiple contingencies that can fit every possible scenario, but expert matters are not anymore capable of seeing few steps to go ahead.
That's very interesting, Hussein, and it really ties into what Martina said about strategic capitalism. What do you want what your companies to do? Do you want to be nationalist? Do you want to be globalist? Do you want your customers to see you as a global supporter or a national supporter? and also the aspect that you mentioned about the brand reputation. What is spoken about you on social media is so important that you have to walk very carefully. And I think that's some really interesting aspects that you mentioned. We'll come back to you subsequently, but for now, Luyolo, I just wanted to ask you. Now, you are dealing with so many crises at the same time, whether it's geopolitical tensions, cyber threats, supply chain disruptions, climate events, and so many regulatory uncertainties like tariffs and trade wars. So, you had, and all companies had traditional enterprise risk management frameworks. Do you feel these are still valid? Do you feel these are still applicable? What changes do you think they need to do, and how are you actually navigating through it in your own company?
Good morning, everyone from South Africa. Thank you so much, Sushil, for hosting me. And like Hussein, I'm joining for the second time, so I'm highly honored for that. So, Sushil, that's a very important question and also very highly relevant, considering, the environment in which businesses are operating in today. So my view from an enterprise risk management perspective, and I happen to be a senior manager in enterprise risk management, is that these traditional risk management frameworks, they are still relevant, but only as a foundation. So, if you can allow me to use an analogy, so I see risk frameworks as an example, as a scaffolding around the building. And this scaffolding is providing the structure, it's providing stability, and it's providing guardrails. However, it does not determine the quality of the building itself. So when you come to risk management, risk frameworks will provide us the necessary foundation. It provides us the discipline and the practice for us to be able to manage risk consistently across the organization. But the ultimate value, in my view, is that it depends in terms of how effectively is it being applied in the organization? How is it being adapted in the organization? And how is it responding to a very interconnected environment, as you've rightfully said? For example, in my team, we have been on a journey to evolve our enterprise risk management processes and frameworks. And we've got a journey to which we are holding ourselves accountable to that. So the approach needs to evolve because, as you've said, risks are no longer occurring in isolation. The challenge that we face today as business leaders is that we're not just managing individual risks, but we need to understand, and there's something I call in my organization risk interdependencies, where we need to understand how a single risk can actually interact, compound, and cascade across the organization. I mean, we saw with the Middle East how Middle East was basically impacting on multiple sectors. You had energy, you had fertilizers from a retail perspective. That's very important for us. And you had multiple other sectors which it was influencing. So then this interconnected nature of risk then requires us then to adopt a more integrated approach. And whenever I address this topic, there's three practical examples that I like to share, and one of it's breaking silos, and I'm very passionate about that one, about breaking organizational silos, and that is something that we do in my team as an example, where we require cross-functional collaboration so that we can give that integrated view of risk. Very, very important. Another thing, and I think Hussein touched on this, it's about resilience. So there needs to be a greater focus on agility and resilience. And in fact, even General Sharma said earlier that organization that will survive and geopolitical risks, it's those that are resilient. So as a risk function, very important for us to provide those forward-looking insights. We help in strategic decision-making on the organization and not just simply reporting on the risks. We have to move beyond risk administration into a more strategic risk advisory role. So in summary, Sushil, yes, they are still relevant, but alone they are not sufficient. The differentiator is really in how they are being applied and adapted. Thank you, Sushil.
That's very insightful, Nirlo, and I think that's a lesson which risk managers across the globe need to take home. That, as you mentioned, that the enterprise risk management standards or processes only provide a framework. You have to actually contextualize them to what's happening so that you can derive the maximum possible benefit out of that, and your risk management processes become more business oriented rather than remaining theoretical exercises. And the faster people get into doing this as business enablers, I think they'll stay more relevant in their organizations. Now I'm going to move to another part of the discussion, which we very briefly Mattia touched about, saying that what is the ROI of AI. At the same time, then we had Saya give us a very detailed exposition about the infrastructure and technology and the sovereignty of AI issues. Rupinder, AI is transforming businesses, but it is also reshaping the threat landscape through deepfakes, cybercrime, misinformation, and automation. Since you are responsible for so many of these aspects within your organizations, what do you see as the biggest opportunities and the greatest risks for these organizations like yours that AI present today?
Yeah, it's indeed it's a very hot topic, and not just from a security perspective. I think now I can tell you that within AXA and within the industry, we're all taking this extremely seriously. It's a management committee topic, and it's an issue that's being cascaded down directly from the management. And also, the shift of parameters is going to be quite significant. So just put into context, when I'm talking about AI here, I'm talking about the advantages of using it as an insurance company to detect deep fakes, to detect fraud as well, because as an insurance company, we'll allow our customers to make a claim against a car damage, for example, with uploading photos, etc. And there's the opportunity for fraud there to happen as well. So the business orientation around that is fantastic. Being able to use AI to detect these elements and to be able to support the business on faster security, data analysis, etc. as well, is a real strategic advantage, and definitely the direction in which we're moving the whole organization in. Now, if you look at it in the wider context of Mythos and probably more recently yesterday, I'm not sure if you've been able to sort of understand the impact of Hugging Face OpenAI, where AI autonomously attacked an organization, and that's quite a scary prospect on its own. With Mythos becoming such a major issue as well, the possibility there is really impacting three key dynamic areas. One is speed at which is going to be unprecedented. Then the scale, the magnitude of that. So being able to detect vulnerabilities at such a magnitude across the whole stack is going to be a massive capability that we don't have in the industry today. And the trust as well. Can we actually trust AI, and what can we use it as a defender also before it gets into the hands of the attackers and it's leveraged in a bad way? So why it matters a lot from a strategic point of view, because if you can imagine, in the past, Microsoft were releasing patches on a monthly basis. We had a bit of time to apply those patches in our organization, etc. That cadence is now going to go out of the window. Now we are going to need to respond within hours to patches that are being deployed. So within our organization, for example, we're looking at 48 hours as a maximum for all patches, and not just the critical and high. We're looking at all patches throughout the whole stack, which means that can our IT teams really cope with that or not? And really trying to refocus the parameters for IT and the business as well. Now, I say that from a business because in the past, security has worked around the business and saying the business priorities are that we need to have uptime, we need to be there for our customers. But now, actually, we are considering downtime is a necessity as well, because we're asking ourselves the question: what's more important, that are we a compromise is allowed, or do we go offline and patch and make sure we're secure? So it's a question that's well raised, but it's also, the answer is going to be quite drastic compared to what we had in the past. Now, security will be able to drive that agenda and really push the business to be able to pull itself down and go offline for a little while, and to bring itself back up once we know we are secure. So for us, AI and the threat of AI is a very strong and real risk prospect, and we are reorientating a lot of our strategies around that as well to ensure that we are viable, we remain viable as a business. We also have the conundrum of us being an insurer, so our customers expect us to be there in their time of need. So therefore, we have an obligation for the regulators and everything else to make sure that we remain resilient. And I think it kind of leads on to other topic areas, which is why resilience becomes so important and becomes the center focus for us as well, to ensure that we are secure, but we focus on what matters the most. What are the key systems we use to deliver the insurance services that our customers depend on, etc. So again, the shift is focusing, but in the immediate future, I think there's going to be a massive acceleration on how we anticipate threats from AI and the dynamic change in that. And it is dynamic because yesterday we didn't believe that AI could become that autonomous that quickly, but Hugging Face, the attack on that demonstrated that it's already there. So it's a constant review process for us in AXA.
Thank you, Rupinder. And that's a very good example you gave of where, earlier, and I'm going to translate that same example into a different framework as a question for Hussein, where you said that due to so many opportunities presenting themselves, we want to constantly stay abreast, maximize the opportunities. At the same time, if there is a risk which is going to shut down your system, you may actually need to take a pause, install a patch, become more resilient, and move forward. So, Hussein, in the same sort of kind of discussion, you yourself have been on the board of a company, you've interacted with boards of other companies. Do you feel that they are so busy optimizing the business opportunities that multiple kinds of geopolitical scenarios present themselves that they have forgotten to be resilient? And on the other end of the spectrum, are there some which are focusing so much on resilience and preparation that they are losing out on business opportunities? How do you see this happening?
Unfortunately, I see less of the second example and more of the first. I've operated closely to multi-billion companies that are aggressive, inspiring, entrepreneurial, and they've done a great job exploding all over the world at a specific phase. And today, the recognition of the fast changing of the environment globally, the operational environment, is not really hitting them as fast as it should, in my opinion. Leaders still want to actually find a way to utilize this change to gain or to grow, because when there's disruption, some lose and some win, some might actually grow. Still, I believe this specific period is not similar to others that we've witnessed during the last decades. Today, adaptability is the new competitive advantage. I believe the main element is that disruption is very hard to be predicted. As I said, expert matters, specialists do not feel bold enough today to give decisions that are very clear, because all elements of the game is changing. And one very important thing is acknowledging that resilience is no longer something that can step in when you see fear factors rising. It's the status quo. That's what is actually getting a bit slow into the organizational structure. So now we see them doing this on a micro level during the crisis to save, let's say, operations in a disrupted region. I think a very, very good lesson was the Gulf. The Arab Gulf was perceived as a utopia for businesses, where collaboration across borders is very easy, where the global market looks at it as one of the metropolitan centers of the world. During the last year, disruptions were not only related to the war, but even domestically between different key players within the Arab Gulf, sensitivities was rising, which will also reflect on the global level. We will be surprised by how government decisions will suddenly disrupt operations in places that doesn't make sense, because it's an alliance. It's actually all part of the GCC. It's one of the most collaborative environments. Suddenly you find laws and regulations that pushed multi-billion companies who was concentrating their presence in one of the countries into actually replicating everything they're doing in another country. because the regulations now are showing an early warning of legal limitation if you're not based in both countries. So today, budgets should reflect that awareness of resilience. Constant positions on sea level should actually reflect resilience as part of the day-to-day operations. Market cover should actually become smaller if you can't fund your resilience strategy, as it's not a luxury anymore. The whole business process, from business development and legal perspective, should always have a contingency plan, not only the operational one, because we're speaking again about political disruption, about decisions that might actually stop you from operating globally, and you'll have to start operating in multiple globes.
Thank you very much, Hussein. I think very enlightening. And Leolo, you see so many agencies, companies, government generating strategic insights, foresight. How are companies sort of translating this into operational action? How can we ensure that you use these strategic foresights, let's say like companies like GoSpa, etc., provide? How do you convert them into scenarios which you can evaluate, and how can then you use these scenarios to ensure that you are better prepared with business continuity and resilience?
Sushil, thank you so much for that question, and I will be addressing some practical steps, that we can take to ensure scenario planning influences business continuity. But before I go into that, Sushil, and provide those practical steps, can I just anchor these steps on two things that I believe are so critical for success, especially in enterprise risk management? And this is the advice I would like to give to risk professionals of today. Firstly, you must have a thorough understanding of the business. Because if you come up with scenarios that are not relevant, you risk distracting the business rather than helping it to make informed decision. That's the first point I want to land. The second part I want to land, and this is something that I'm hugely passionate about, is that as a risk professional, the greatest gift that you can offer your organization, it is clarity in ambiguity. When leaders have clarity, they make better decisions, they respond faster, they are able to navigate this uncertainty that we are contending with today with confidence as well as with resilience. Now, using those things as anchor, let me come to your question then around practical steps. And I will share some of the things that we do in my organization as well. First and foremost for me is that you have to agree the principles up front. For example, in my organization, we are clear in crisis that protecting employee safety and protecting the safety of our customers, that is our top priority as an organization, because these principles are going to help us in making and guiding decisions. For example, in certain markets where we operate, we have had to take decisions to close our stores. That decision was based on the fact that the safety of our people was at risk, and we didn't want to go into that risk. So agreeing on those principles then becomes very important. Then also, when it comes to scenario planning, challenging of assumptions, and as I always say, keep things simple. What I find is that businesses do not always think about the best case or the worst case scenario. And I often, in my environment, I would use, the best case, I would use the base case as well as the worst case approach, just to broaden the discussion. And also, as we saw now with the Middle East, and we did our scenario planning, stress testing exercises, what was important is that for each scenario, you have to clearly articulate what those impacts are under each scenario. You have to clearly articulate the implications. The business responses must be clearly documented and articulated under each scenarios, because these actions are basically then predetermined, so that as an organization, we can be able to respond quickly when that risk actually happens or that scenario plays out or it unfolds. And now the question that I always ask is to say, can we translate this scenario into real-time action? What was also important, and we applied it in the Middle East as well, was the importance of having clear indicators, key risk indicators, and having clear triggers in place for each of those scenarios. Because sometimes it may not always be obvious when a particular scenario is unfolding. So when you have those predetermined triggers, we actually help management to identify the action when it needs to be taken. For example, if I look at my scenarios for Middle East, I mean, we even looked at defining indicators and triggers around Brent crude increasing. And if Brent crude reaches a certain price per dollar, that then required a certain action, or there was a trigger that was linked to that. And also, it's important to have practical decisions. Approach the executives with those decisions now in the scenario planning and get sign off on those decisions that would need to be taken under each scenario. So that's very important. And a lot of the decision, for example, in my context, from a retail perspective, you ask questions to say, are we able to continue with trade under this particular scenario? Do we have to reduce trade into certain nodes or regions, etc.? So that then becomes very important. And then also, testing the scenarios. You have to test them, doing the simulation exercise, stress testing scenarios, because it's one thing developing the scenario, but it's another thing to actually determine whether the response will actually work. So I think to conclude that point, scenario planning is very valuable, but it has to lead to decisions. You have to have triggers, you must have owners, and you must have clear actions linked to that. Thanks, Sushil.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for, outlining it so structurally and in such a simple and escalationary manner. And I agree with you completely that having plans, having triggers, indicators, owners are of no use if you don't stress test your plans and if you don't do simulations internally and externally. And that is something which everyone needs to put into place. But you also you said something which is very important right at the beginning, that at many places and at many times you have taken decisions to suspend business operations because you value the safety of your people and your assets. And I think that is something which we always must remember, that we as risk and security professionals, while we are there to enable business decisions, we are also there to protect ourselves. And with that, I will take the question to Rupinder. Rupinder, you've been in security for a while, protecting people and assets of your company. But increasingly, security professionals are being seen as enablers of business. They are getting into advising on resilience and business continuity. How do you see this role changing? And again, what would be your advice to security professionals across the world on how to make this role that you carry more relevant?
Yeah, it's a very good question, actually. In my role at AXA Global Business Services, I've seen that strong shift, because if you look at it mostly in Europe, the key threat vector is cybersecurity, is information security. Whereas I think in GBS, because of the geopolitics and where we are, actually all the dimensions of security come into play. So resilience, physical security and safety, and information security. But where I think the key advantage is coming from is that when you're looking at resilience in a good in the proper way, you really want to make your key priority services, your key services that you on which your organization is operating on, as resilient and as secure as possible. So if you then start to orientate your view around that, then you start to understand what are your key assets what are the key people, process, and technology you use to deliver those, and then you start to shift your priority if something does happen on making sure those elements are protected first, and the resiliency is around that as well. So from a security point of view, security used to look at assets individually, and we were doing that, a few weeks back as well. We're looking at what are all our servers, what's the vulnerability count on those, and how do we sort of tackle those from a vulnerability stack point of view. But actually, we might shift that and say, look, what are our servers? Which are the servers actually used to deliver the priority services that we have for our customers and so on, and which must be as minimal viable, to survive the organization and the services. and then orientate our view on security and risk around that perspective, so that we're securing those. If worst comes to worst, we know specifically what services we need to recover first. How do we do that, and how do we prioritize that, rather than looking at everything, is what I'm trying to say. So for me, security is giving that shift now. So we are looking to work to understand the customer journey. What are the priority services? What are the regulatory requirements? And DORA was a good one coming out from the Europe region, where digital operational resilience is key to ensure that we understand from a risk point of view what are our main services, how resilient are they, what are the key risks to them, and how do we protect them. So all of it comes together, and I think orientation around resilience becomes a key shift, and I think it's a good shift because it really allows you to focus on where you need to focus. So from that point of view, I think resilience is going to be a big, and security becomes a strong business advantage as well, because if you can demonstrate to your CIOs, your CEOs as well, actually what we're doing here is protecting the key business line, and this is where we shift it. I think that's a strong advantage point.
Thank you very much, Rupinder. Really great perspective. And actually, I was just thinking to myself and looking at the profile of this panel today. I'm sitting in India, but looking at global businesses, especially in UK and Europe. I have Loyolo sitting in South Africa, giving the perspective from his part of the world. We have Rupinder sitting in the UK, but also managing India and Morocco for now, and looking at the entire business process operations in the region. We have Hussein sitting in Jordan, but managing everything that he and his clients require in the West Asian region. So really good to have such a wide geographical spread for the panel, so much expertise in terms of operational risk management. So we heard the first part where Gospa gave us overviews of what is happening in the world from the economic, geopolitical, and technological view. And in this panel, we've tried to focus on how these risks and how these opportunities present themselves to risk managers so that they can safeguard their people, safeguard their assets, safeguard their operations and processes, and yet become business enablers. So it's really been nice to hear your views. And before we wind up the panel, just a quick, if you can just give in one sentence to my panelists, each of you starting with Hussein, what would be one piece of advice that you could give to be better prepared in the next 1 year?
In the next coming year, I believe companies should become very conservative when it comes to political identities, both on an organizational and personal level. We should be as global as possible and build strategic partnerships with a very solid global network. Those are the ones who will survive rapid changes.
Thank you very much, Hussein. And Loyolo, you gave us a very important point about having clarity or providing clarity in ambiguity. Anything else that you can suggest to risk managers to be more effective in the coming year?
Absolutely. And that point on clarity in ambiguity, my advice would be to say to organization is that they need to invest in building an organizational capability to create that clarity in ambiguity. So what does that mean? It means we need a capability where we can generate insights. We need a capability where we can challenge assumptions. We need to identify emerging risks and provide a forward-looking perspective that is going to support decision making. Thank you so much, Sushil.
Thank you, Loyolo. Rupinder, your takeaway in one sentence.
I would say that given everything that's happening around us and everything else, I think we need to take AI as a threat very, very seriously, especially with Mythos and everything else. So that's unfortunately that's dominating my mind at the moment. So I would also send that word out. I think it's a key threat vector, and I think we need to take it quite seriously, and hopefully working with all our partners as well, we'll all be able to take this to the next level as well.
Thank you very much, Rupinder. Thank you, Hussein. Thank you, Loyolo. You guys have been amazing, and I still miss Karen, who couldn't join us on the panel. And with that, I would like to formally thank you and close this panel discussion. And back to you, Mrinal, for the rest of the event.
Thank you.
So thank you very much. Thank you, Sushil. Thank you to all our panelists for an engaging and practical discussion and talking about how to address these risks operationally. Surely, this session would definitely help all in making better business decisions, stronger preparedness, and organizational resilience. So, with this, we approach to the conclusion of our today's webinar. It is my pleasure to invite Dr. Shubhistan Ghaffar, the chairperson of CRDDP, to deliver the closing remarks. Dr. Ghaffar is a public policy strategist, institution builder, and education and gender specialist with nearly 3 decades of experience across governance, institutional development, international cooperation, and sustainable development. As chairperson of CRDDP, she leads initiatives focused on evidence-based policy dialogue, strategic partnerships, and inclusive institutional growth. Dr. Ghaffar, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mrinal. Greeting from CRDDP, because we have the different time zone at different part of the world. So we have the global audience as well as the speaker. So now this is the conclusion of our today's GSR. We are going to wrap it today. I extend my sincere gratitude and thanks to the keynote speaker, who was Lieutenant Sudhir Sinha, and then other panelists from GOSPA and also from the MidCat. So each participant who has spent the time with us throughout 1.5, it's more than 1.5 hour. So I really have thanked each and everybody. So today's discussion has reinforced a powerful message. While the future cannot always be predicted, it can certainly be anticipated and prepared for in a world shaped with geopolitics, tension, economical uncertainty, technological disruption, artificial intelligence, climate change, and evolving societal expectation. Organizations can no longer afford to simply react to change. They must be prepared to anticipate it. Strategic foresight, informed decision making, and adaptability, and so longer optional. They have become the foundation of resilient leadership and sustainable growth. The collaboration between MidCat Advisory, GOSPA Consulting, and the Center for Research and Debate in Development Policy, CRDDP, reflect our shared commitment to combine global expertise, evidence-based research, and practical business solution. Together, we can aim to equip leadership and organization with the knowledge, analytical tools, and confidence needed to navigate the increasing complex and interconnected world. As we reflect on the global landscape today, one thing is very clear: uncertainty has become now the normal. Yet, history reminds us that every period is a disruption, also create an opportunity for those who are prepared. The future will not belong to those who wait for the certainty. It will belong to those who embrace foresight, innovation, collaboration, and courage to adapt. Let us leave today with a shared commitment, not merely to respond to change, but to anticipate it, not merely to manage risks, but to transform them into the opportunity, and not merely to prepare them for the future, but help to shape it. The decision we make today will be determined how resilient, competitive, and successful our organization become tomorrow. Let us today dialogue not for the end of the conversation, but the beginning of stronger partnership, continue learning, and meaningful collaboration across industries, institutions, and the nation. Together, we can build organization that not only prepare for the future, but are capable to shaping it. On behalf of CRDDP, MidCat Advisory, and GOSPA Consultant, I extend my heartfelt gratitude and thanks to our speakers, partners, and every participant making today's global scenario review in meaningful success. Thank you once again. I wish all to continue success, safe and shaping the stronger and more resilient future. I thank everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Ghaffar. Thank you, Dr. Ghaffar, for that crisp summary and those thoughtful, insightful closing remarks. To our audience, thank you for your participation and engagement throughout the Global Scenario Review 2026. If any of your questions remain unanswered, we encourage you to connect with MidCat Advisory and the GOSPA consulting teams after the event. Also, on behalf of all the organizing partners, I extend our sincere thanks to our speakers, panelists, and participants for their time, insights, and valuable contributions. Please do follow the collaborating organizations through their respective digital channels for future webinars, reports, and updates. Have a pleasant day, everyone. Thank you, and a very goodbye. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Awesome.
Thank you so much.